My guest this morning is a New York Times best-selling author and a Jesuit priest, Father James Martin. His new book, Work in Progress, and this is a long title, Work in Progress, Confessions of a Busboy, Dishwasher, Caddy, Usher, Factory Worker, Bank Teller, Corporate Tool, and Priest. Father Martin, congratulations on the book and good morning.
Yeah, thanks so much. Good morning to you. Great to be on the show.
One of the things that, as I'm going through the book, the rock guitarist Joe Walsh from the Eagles has said, and I'm paraphrasing him here, that as we're living our lives, they seem very random. This happens, then this happens, then this happens. And yet, when we look at it in the aggregate, there is a pattern to all of this. How would you say that that pattern fits your life going from busboy to Jesuit priest?
Well, it's the story of it's called Work in Progress, as you say, and it's a kind of progression of different jobs, so that kind of progress. But I go from these kind of crazy, funny, kind of kooky summer jobs where I learn a lot of lessons into the corporate world after college at the University of Pennsylvania, and then into the Jesuits. And so it's really a book about learning lessons from work and life lessons, and about listening and apologizing and being kind to people. So yeah, when I look back, I can see a lot of grace there and a lot of some patterns. Funny enough, I thought you were going to go and talk about all the rock songs that were in the book as well, because there's a little bit of a soundtrack for the book too.
Yeah, yes, indeed, there is. You talk about, you've called yourself a lukewarm Catholic. And I'm wondering how that experience of you growing up as a lukewarm Catholic has led you to where you are today.
Well, my family was Catholic, and I went to first commun. I was baptized. I went to first communion, and I made my confirmation and all that. But we really weren't the kind of Catholics that talked about God a lot, or said the rosary, or went to daily mass, or I didn't go to any Catholic schools growing up. And when I went to college, I still sort of continued in that model. And it really wasn't until I was working at GE, I was working in New York and then in Stamford, Connecticut, and started to realize that while business is a real vocation for a lot of people, it just wasn't for me. And one night I turned on the TV and turned on a documentary about Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk. And that just kind of spoke to me. That spoke to this kind of lukewarm Catholic, who didn't really know much about Catholicism, and prompted me to, walk away from GE and walk into the Jesuits.
Called corporate America soul destroying.
Well, I want to say, because I know a lot of listeners probably work in corporate America, that business is a real vocation for a lot of people. I mean, I know people who worked for GE, my former company, spent their whole lives in it and contributed to the common good and did a lot of great things and were very happy. But it just wasn't for me. And I really needed to get out. And I just found myself, feeling stressed, and I was getting all these migraines and stomach problems and all that. And I think all of us need to find our vocation, what we're happiest doing, and what we feel like we're meant to do. And being in the business world, while it was for my friends, wasn't for me.
You mentioned Thomas Merton, and I'm really, really condensing this here, but he grew up in the Church of England, if I'm not mistaken. I guess fell away from the church, runs into a Hindu monk who says, you need to reconnect with Christianity. And he ultimately becomes an inspiration to so many, including yourself. And you want to talk about, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. In the aggregate, you look at it together and you go, oh, yeah, of course that makes sense.
Yeah, and his life just spoke to me. I was 25 years old when I saw that documentary on PBS on Channel 13. I always say TV changed my life. And, the life in the monastery, which was not what I was called to, just seemed so beautiful and kind of captivating and romantic in a sense. And it got me sort of started reading a lot of his books, which made me consider entering the priesthood. And I finally entered the Jesuits. So, yeah, a lot of it was thanks to Thomas Merton, as I talk about in the book.
What was it about the Jesuit order that led you there?
Yeah, good question. I was living in Stamford, Connecticut, and I went to my local parish priest and I said I'd like to be a priest, and I don't think he knew who I was. And he said, well, you should talk to your local diocese, which is Bridgeport, the Bridgeport diocese, and then your home diocese, which was the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And he said, believe it or not, as an aside, he said, and you might as well talk to the Jesuits up at Fairfield University in Connecticut. And I mean, talk about an aside. And I thought, yeah, okay, why not? And when I met the Jesuits, things seemed to click. I like the idea that Jesuits, people know the Jesuits mainly in this area for their schools, Fordham, St. Peter's Prep, Fairfield, right? Uh, and I thought, wow, you could be a teacher in a Jesuit, you could be a parish priest in a Jesuit, you could be a retreat director in a Jesuit, like at Morristown. And I like that. And so it kind of clicked with me. But really, it was just this guy's kind of, like a by the way, go up and talk to the Jesuits at Fairfield.
You mentioned Fordham. My dad and I are both Fordham graduates. And as a kid, I remember a conversation that he and I had that I did not understand until many years later when I asked him if Fordham was Catholic. And he said, no, it's Jesuit.
Oh my gosh.
And, fast forward some years later, and, you have that joke, is the Pope Catholic? Well, no, he's Jesuit.
Yes, well, well, we are Jesuit. We are Catholic and Jesuit. Yeah, that's I've heard that before, though. I'm glad you went to Fordham. Go Rams.
Go Rams, indeed. You did have the opportunity to meet Pope Francis before he passed, and the first Jesuit priest, which is something I did not think I would see in my lifetime. What did he bring as a Jesuit to the papacy?
Me neither. I have to tell you a funny joke, though. A friend of mine is a Jesuit historian, and he told his class a couple of years ago there are two things he was sure of. There will never be a Jesuit pope, and there will never be an American pope. And he said after Pope Leo was elected, I'm this is pretty funny. It's bad enough to be wrong, but to be wrong twice in a row is pretty bad. Pope Francis brought to the papacy his distinctive Jesuit spirituality, which is the spirituality of finding God in all things, and also, in particular, something called discernment. Really trying to see where the Holy Spirit is at work in our lives today, and at work in different people's lives. And I really think he took that seriously. But he was also a great guy. And by the way, so is Pope Leo. Pope Leo, we have a great new pope. I mean, he really not we should be excited about him as Catholics, not just because he's an American, but because he's a great guy. And I think all Americans can be excited about him.
Well, that was the second thing I did not think I would see in my lifetime. And my younger daughter and I, as we were watching the announcement, we looked at each other and I went, an American?
Yes.
Really? And I know there was a second, I believe, the Cardinal from Newark. His name was being bandied about
Hmm.
as well. And I'm thinking, well, I don't think that's going to happen.
Well,
But
can I tell you a funny story about that? I was at a meeting for the 2 years, one October 2023 and October 2024, called the Synod, which was this sort of worldwide meeting. And I, for 2 weeks, was sitting with Cardinal Robert Prevost at his table, right? So for, 8 hours a day and 2 weeks. And so you get to know people. We're talking about different things and talking about the future of the church. So anyway, he comes out on the balcony. I was stunned. I mean, he was on people's lists. Nonetheless, to see someone dressed as the Pope coming on the balcony is pretty amazing. In any event, I go back to my Jesuit community and I say, I can't believe it. He was at my table. And one of the Jesuits said, no, you were at his table.
you are very active on social media, and in many respects, you've become a lightning rod in some ways. In fact, I found something on Reddit the other day, Father Martin. Someone posted, I'm a non Catholic here. Is Father James Martin as reviled in Main Street Catholicism as he is on Catholic Twitter? And I should point out that next to, I think, maybe baseball hitting, as a topic, Catholic Twitter might be one of the most toxic places I've ever seen. You get people who come at you and say, thank you so much for whatever it is you happen to be saying. And there are others who come after you and say you're a heretic and should be excommunicated. How do you deal with those extremes?
Well, one way is by not reading that stuff. I definitely don't go on Reddit. I think you can take away the might be. I think it is one of the most toxic places. As a friend of mine says, it's not see how they love one another, as Jesus said, it's see how they shove one another. Um, so most of it I try to ignore. I also remember that, look, you can't be liked and loved and approved of all the time. I have the sort of approval of my superiors to do all these things. I've met with Pope Francis and Pope Leo. I'm basically not doing anything against church teaching. And in fact, I'm following church teaching by trying to welcome people. I work with a lot of LGBTQ Catholics. But, look, social media is a blessing and a curse. I mean, I think it really helps connect people. You can kind of share information, but it can be a curse sometimes. I mean, people are kind of mean, especially when it's anonymous. So yeah, I try not to look at it too much and, try to, oh, it keeps you humble too, right? Some people come up to me and say, oh, you're a prophet. Other people say you're a demon. I was like, yeah, I think it's somewhere in between.
You mentioned the LGBTQ community. You've been very active working with them. What have you learned most about them and yourself for that matter?
Well, I think I've learned that, gosh, they've suffered a lot in the church. They often feel unwelcome in their own church. You remember these people are baptized, right? The other thing I was thinking is that when the church, in a sense, excludes or ignores or even rejects LGBT people, people might say, well, that's a very small percentage, like whatever it is, 5% of the population. But when you think about their parents, their brothers and sisters, their aunts and uncles, their friends, right? That's a big percentage of the church. And so I think the church has to remember that when they're excluding LGBT people, they're excluding a pretty big part of the church. And so what we're called to do is really just listen to them and accompany them.
Your book is called Work in Progress. And, we
Mhm.
get to adulthood or we get to our, what we, I guess, consider our final occupation. And you think, well, I'm done. How much of a
Yeah.
work in progress are you still?
Oh, very much. And I think we all are. I mean, if we're honest, I don't think we ever, and we should never stop growing and learning, right? And being formed. We Jesuits have a really nice expression, which is we call our training formation. God is kind of forming you, and there's that image of the potter forming the pot, the clay, which I love, and a great image of God from the Old Testament. I think we should also be open to being formed no matter who we are. As they say, to be, what does they say, to be perfect is to change, I think. Something like that. You can tell I'm not very good with quotes. So yeah, so I think it's important for us to change and grow and learn.
For people who are watching this on video, they can see that there is a Philadelphia Phillies cap over your right shoulder. And though I am New York City born and lived there for a number of years, I also grew up outside of Philadelphia. I lived in King of Prussia as a
You're
child.
kidding.
No, Mother of
You know
Divine
that's
Providence was my parish.
I know that place, and the King of Prussia is in my book. Yeah, I talk about the King of Prussia Mall.
Well, my elementary school was literally on the other side of the turnpike
Get out of
from
here.
the mall.
Well,
And
I have to tell you something. One of the things I took out of the book, I grew up in a town called Plymouth Meeting, which is very near King of Prussia and had a mall, but not as nice as the King of Prussia Mall. And there's a little bit of a rivalry there in the book. But one of the funny things is when I was in elementary school and high school, we would learn about the King of Prussia, right, who was a Revolutionary War sort of figure. And every time it came up in class, the teacher would talk about the King of Prussia, and people would say, "Oh, is he named after the mall?"
I'm a couple of years older than you. One of the most traumatic experiences of my life, Father Martin, was the 1964 Philadelphia Phillies collapse.
Okay. Well, my condolences. Yeah, I'm a Phillies fan as well.
The book is called Work in Progress: Confessions of a Busboy, Dishwasher, Caddy, Usher, Factory Worker, Bank Teller, Corporate Tool, and Priest. Father James Martin, congratulations on the book. Best of luck with it. And thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much. God bless you.